whether you think he's great or not, the Falcons are in the conversation now. They are a relevant team, a team that should expect to make the playoffs. And that just hasn't been the case since about, 2018 or so. Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast. I'm Dave Helman, and the money is officially flying. Maybe not officially. The league year still starts Wednesday afternoon. So yeah, we're not even into the start of the new league year, but in case you live under a rock, the negotiating window is open. Deals can be agreed to in principle, and the NFL has wasted no time. Blockbuster deals all over the place, major trades as teams seek to gear up for the 2024 season. It has been an exciting first day, to say the least. So many of our questions heading into free agency already answered. My good buddy, Greg Auman of FoxSports.com, was gracious enough to join me again to break it all down. The big moves, the interesting, the head-scratching moves, the confusing, the exciting, everything in between. I'm going to make it short and sweet. We'll get to that because the longer I talk, the more likely it is something new is going to happen before we can finish the show. So you know the drill. Please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We'll be back Thursday to break down everything else that happens. We'll be here all offseason long. We got you covered. Our handle on all of the socials is at NFL on Fox Pod. Please give us a subscription, follow, a like, leave a review, all that good stuff. All right. I can't talk anymore because I don't want to miss any more news. So let's jump right into it. Greg Auman joined me to cover all of the craziness from the first day of free agency. All right, Greg, let's be as efficient as possible because the way this is going, something's probably going to happen while you're on with me. In the time since you hopped on Zoom, Brian Burns has been traded to the New York Giants. It's just that kind of day. So we'll get to Brian Burns. There's a lot to get to, but let's start it with the big ticket items. You came on the show with me last week, and we talked about the landing spot for some of these quarterbacks. Let's start there with the biggest, most expensive position. Kirk Cousins, now a member of your division, the NFC South, agreeing to a deal with the Atlanta Falcons. And if I can be honest, this felt like the most poorly kept secret in the NFL for the last 2 or 3 days that this was going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those where, last week we're talking about his in-laws are in town and all the connections and, Pro Football Talk is saying that he's already looking to move his family there. So there was this lingering, like, what if Minnesota realizes they might not have very much left at quarterback and tries to make a push? They didn't. So it's one of those where I think you see how much money is involved for the Falcons. This is 4 years and $180 million, $100 million guaranteed. You realize how much that franchise was aware of what the drop-off was at quarterback and what their plan B might have looked at. And I think you pay a lot to avoid that scenario, basically.
Yeah, which, there's 2 ways to go with this. I guess let's start with Atlanta because this is the big ticket quarterback they've been missing since Matt Ryan left town, basically. And I'm curious, we've seen what a struggle it is to win this division for the last couple of years. Is it as easy as saying the Atlanta Falcons are the prohibitive favorites right now?
I think they're probably a slight favorite right now. Everybody got excited when the Saints got Derek Carr last year, thinking that would push them over the top, and it got them close. They tied for the best record in the division, but they didn't close it out. So I do think, the perception of this Falcons team a year ago, all last season, was a great team that was missing a quarterback. Solid offensive line, great young talent on offense, a good defense. And they just had quarterbacks that gave them 17 touchdowns in 17 games and as many interceptions. And you can't win without that position. So I think what this does, as you said, maybe for the first time since Matt Ryan, or maybe even 2 or 3 years before Matt Ryan was gone in Atlanta, is it gives them a guy who can be a playmaking quarterback, a 30-touchdown quarterback. I think the number with Cousins is 25 touchdowns or more in the last 8 full seasons he's played. And that's much better. Atlanta's had 17 touchdowns each of the last 2 years, 20 the year before that. So this should get them to be a much better offensive team. and put them in position at least to make the playoffs, if not to win the NFC South.
Yeah, I can't, Falcons fans, I can't promise you that you're going to make it to the Super Bowl or anything. I think Vikings fans are going to bring up the lack of postseason success, but I think you can set your watch to Kirk Cousins being a good, productive quarterback. I think Atlanta is going to be in the conversation in a way that they just haven't been the last 4 or 5 years. Really quickly, before we move on, I do think it's interesting to see where Minnesota goes from here, because now all of a sudden it's nice not having to pay the guy, but now it's, I don't know, do you try to swing a trade for Justin Fields, or do you do something crazy in the draft to get up and draft one of those guys? The options all of a sudden don't look inspiring in Minnesota.
Right. With Mayfield back in Tampa, with Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh, now all of a sudden it's like, hey, Sam Darnold might be available. So yeah, I would think there's got to be something between those two. Whether it's, I mean, trading for Fields, trading within the division is always a little bit harder to pull off. So the Bears might not want to. The Bears might take a slightly worse offer just to avoid seeing Justin Fields twice a year in divisional play. But again, he would be probably their best remaining option. There's not a lot of good, even second tier quarterbacks available. You're talking about guys like Garoppolo. There's other people they could go to, but it's nobody you'd confuse with Kirk Cousins at first glance.
I'm really interested to see how they navigate that. We'll have time when they eventually show us their plans. We can talk about it then. Let's get to those other two guys you mentioned. You and Eric Williams came on the show, and y'all both honed in on Russell Wilson as a very interesting storyline. I got to be honest with you. I thought he might hang out there for a little while longer than he did, but Russ didn't even wait until free agency opened. He signed a deal in Pittsburgh for roughly $1.2 million. I like the deal in the sense that I think Pittsburgh got better at quarterback, and this was already a team that made the playoffs, but am I crazy if I don't think it changes the calculus for the Steelers all that much in the AFC pecking order?
They're not like a top tier. I mean, I think it definitely helps them on the offensive side of the ball. It felt like for them to move forward with with Kenny Pickett versus Mason Rudolph was a lot like the Falcons a year ago with like Desirator or Taylor Heineke. They were going to have a hole at quarterback. So what this does is it gives them, if you just get Russell Wilson of last year, which is 26 touchdowns against 8 interceptions, you're getting that for $1.2 million. He's one of the cheapest guys on their roster. So even as a 1-year bridge quarterback, I think they're better for it. It makes them certainly a team that's expected to be a playoff team. I don't know if they're going to challenge Baltimore. I don't know. I mean, Cincinnati's going to be better. Cleveland, that whole division is hard to get a good beat on right now. But I think it helps them. I think it's a good match for him. I can see why he's going to a veteran coach, a consistent winner, has some weapons to throw to. And for the Steelers, it's definitely better than running it back with Kenny Pickett and hoping that he just finds himself in year 3.
That is one thing. I do think the Steelers deserve credit because they are more than almost anybody. I just think the Steelers they're set in their ways. It seems like they've done everything the same way since the 1970s, famously only 3 head coaches going back to Chuck Noll. So for them to kind of step outside of that comfort zone and bring in some competition for Kenny Pickett and to do it with a very high profile player. Like I said, I'm not convinced the Steelers are a drastically better team because of this, but I do think they deserve credit for sort of deviating from that very typical Steeler way.
Sure. And this is kind of, from a locker room chemistry standpoint, there's a risk involved here. Russ isn't for everybody. He's going to have to handle himself probably better and have things work out from a chemistry standpoint better than they did in Denver. In that, again, this is a guy that it got to the point where they were okay taking on $85 million in dead money, in paying him $39 million this year not to play. So you're taking a gamble that Tomlin, just as a manager, as a guy who gets people to get along when they might not otherwise do so, he's got to figure out ways to make that work so there isn't a negative aspect from a locker room vibe standpoint.
Let's take it down to your backyard, Tampa, Florida. And very similar to their whole offseason. They did it with Mike Evans a week ago, and now Baker Mayfield re-signs in Tampa Bay. I don't think that's a surprise. I think most people expected that to happen. But just the way that it all just sort of came together, no drama, no negotiating in public. Baker slots right in 3 years, $100 million with a chance to make 15 or so million in incentives. I think it's just rare for a free agent quarterback, the most important position, to just kind of slot right in. But I guess it's a testament to the relationship there with Baker and the Tampa front office that this just felt really easy for such a big time negotiation.
Right. I agree. And I think it speaks well to Mayfield putting a priority on being in a good situation where he's comfortable and feels like he's valued and a leader, as opposed to rolling the dice and going somewhere where that might not be the case. I think he probably could have gotten more. I mean, if he is a free agent right now, he's probably going to the loser of this Falcons Vikings deal for more money than he's getting right now from the Bucks. But again, I think he, came there not knowing. I mean, when he went to the Bucks last year for $4 million, that's probably his last shot to go to a team as a presumptive starter. And he made the most of that. He had career highs in yards, career highs in passing touchdowns, led them to the playoffs, won a game in the playoffs, and kind of won the city over. It's not easy to take over a team from Tom Brady. And he did that, and he won as many games, more games than Brady did, won a playoff game when Brady did in his last year. And now he gets the fruits of that, which is, for him, at least 2 years and 60 million.
I like the symmetry of it. I like that the Bucks know where they are. I like, similar to Kirk in Atlanta. I don't know if they're going to win a Super Bowl, but I think this last year or two, maybe 3, it feels like Tampa's last chance to do something with this core of guys that they won the Super Bowl with back in 2020, whether that's Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. We'll see what happens with Levante David, but this feels like pushing your chips in for 2 years. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, that's when the Buccaneers retool. But I like keeping the continuity of this team that kind of surprised people last year.
Right. Oh, yeah. And this will be a little bit different in that, with the Brady years, you had such high expectations. With last year, you had amazingly low expectations where some people thought they'd be among the worst teams in the league.
Yeah.
Now I think it'll be kind of middle of the pack. Now, I think the NFC South will be seen as a dogfight. Will be seen as, hey, the Falcons, went out and got Kirk Cousins. They're the team to beat. Bucks were able to bring everybody back, maybe a little pieces here and there because they're not quite as cap strapped as they were a year ago. And the Saints are right there too. I mean, the Saints, again, went 9-8, tied for the best record in the league. They've got Carr back. They probably won't have the upgrades talent-wise. The rest of the division will, but I think they'll be right in it. So yeah, it makes it a fun division to handicap going into the season.
I'm going to say I don't think anybody would mistake it with the best division in football.
Oh no.
But it might be the most competitive. I mean, I don't think anybody's backing the Panthers right now, but other than that, you could make a strong case for any of the other 3. So that's going to be something to watch as we inch closer to training camp. All right, let's take it to the defensive tackle position. And I mean, Aaron Donald did this years ago. Like, I think people have gotten used to the idea of defensive tackle being a premium position, but we're really hammering it home at this point. Chris Jones re-signs in Kansas City, 5 years, $158+ million. And if that wasn't enough, in the same division now, Christian Wilkins goes from Miami to Las Vegas on a 4-year, $110 million deal. I'm curious. I mean, I don't think defensive tackle has replaced edge rusher as one of the big 5 money positions, but I don't know, man. Some of these paychecks might have you believing otherwise.
No, I mean, Justin Madubuike almost got $100 million on his 4-year deal.
That's another one. You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So no, I mean, if you think about, Wilkins, you're almost wondering why Miami didn't franchise him, and that the franchise tag was 1 year and $22 million, and he goes out and signs for 27 per. So that they're probably, unless there just was some kind of agreement they wouldn't do that, they probably missed out on an opportunity to get something for him there. In that if you tag and trade, in theory, you're getting him cheaper than the Raiders did, and then you don't have to give up that much for it. But yeah, the D tackles, again, Chris Jones absolutely set the mark. We had him in that top 50 as the number 1 free agent. Chiefs aren't going to be able to bring everybody back, but they definitely bring him back. And he's, at the very front and center of that defense. A big part of why they'll be back competing for another one this coming season.
Wait, we have a breaking update. What was that, Justin? Who signed in Washington? That's what I was talking about, Greg. Austin Ekeler now to the Washington Commanders have been a very busy team here on the first day of free agency. Right? Couple of former Cowboys, Tyler Biadasz, Dorrance Armstrong. They got your guy out of Carolina, Frankie Louvu, going to Washington, and now Austin Ekeler. I think you see this all the time. It's a completely new organization in Washington. They had a boatload of cap space. And I mean, Dan Quinn seems like he's trying to build the bones of a competitive roster here in his first year as the head coach.
Absolutely. We kind of knew they would. I mean, they had a crazy amount of cap space
Stacks
to have
of it. Yeah.
$100 million in cap space and a number 2 overall pick. You kind of can line yourself up where you don't have to pay a whole lot for your quarterback and you can surround him with talent. So to see that they, got rid of Chase Young, got rid of Montez Sweat during the season last year, they kind of were creating a shopping spree, a spending spree, where they would be able to have a lot of pull here on the first day of free agency. And again, like Frankie Louvu, I think is a strong signing for them. He's a guy who's a linebacker, but can kind of moonlight as a pass rusher, had 7 sacks this past year. That division is hard to paint because the Eagles don't have Kelsey. The Eagles don't have Fletcher Cox. They're losing people. They've also just added Saquon Barkley, and they've just added an elite pass rusher, paying $17 million today. So, I mean, it's one of those where there's a lot in flux. So it's hard to know within those. I mean, Commanders certainly were bringing up the rear this past year, but I think they'll be able to narrow that gap. The Giants, you don't know where they're going to fit in, who their quarterback's going to be. But I do think the NFC East will be an entertaining division again.
Oh, always. Yeah. And when the Cowboys will get active in free agency about 2 weeks from now. So we'll see what they do when they finally feel like spending money. I hate to jump here, but this is what you do in free agency. All this money's flying around. The Commander, if they draft a quarterback at 2 and he hits, they will have the talent in place to be successful. I mean, we saw it last year with Houston. Like, nobody was taking the Texans seriously. If the quarterback hits, there's no telling. I mean, the Commanders, they have 2 great receivers in Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. You like their they've got defensive pieces. Offensive line, even with Tyler Biadasz, not so sure I'm sold on that. But hey, free agency's young. There's still time for them to add to that. So if the quarterback they pick at 2 is good, that's a very interesting team all of a sudden.
New defensive-minded coach, number 2 overall pick on a quarterback, ton of money spent in free agency. It's kind of the Texans' blueprint, and it's easy. It's probably not going to win a division title like Houston did, but it wouldn't be hard to get them to 9-8, to get them to 10-7 if things go right and the rookie doesn't look like a rookie. And they're one of the most improved teams in the NFL then.
Which I was so caught up on what they had. They add Austin Ekeler into that mix at running back to go along with Brian Robinson. Yeah, there's stuff to feel good about there. A phenomenal piece of improvisation there, Greg. I want to hit on one more point with Chris Jones specifically. With the size of that deal that the Chiefs gave him, and again, the writing was on the wall for at least a week or so. What does that mean for L'Jarius Sneed? I mean, we know they gave him permission to request a trade. It doesn't seem very logical that they would sign him to a major deal as well. Would we think that he's probably getting moved between now and the draft?
I think so. I mean, cornerbacks are so coveted in this league. There's going to be decent compensation coming back on attack and trade for Sneed. I mean, you think about Jalen Johnson's off the market now. This is the best corner available, and you have to give up a pick to get him. But I mean, the Bucs just got a 3rd round pick for Carlton Davis, who's at $14 million, isn't nearly the corner that Sneed is. So no, I think it's one of those where they have some real financial constraints that will keep them from signing everybody they want. But they brought Drew back. He's back now. They've got linebacker covered with him back. They've got Chris Jones back. It's one of those where, as a championship team, nobody comes harder for free agents than guys that can pluck stars off of a championship team. And they're a 2-time defending champ. So they're going to get rated. They're going to get hit hard in free agency. They did well just to keep Jones at the top of that list and not lose him. But again, the price you pay for that is you just don't have the flexibility to keep the supporting cast you'd like around him.
I think if you've got a piece like Chris Jones, though, and then you have Patrick Mahomes, and we know they've drafted well, bringing in guys like McDuffie, bringing in guys like Nick Bolton, George Karlaftis, I could go on and on. Like, if you know that, and that those guys will be there and be on cheap contracts for at least the next 2 or 3 years, yeah, give me the draft pick. Let L'Jarius Sneed go get his payday, and we'll go find our next Trent McDuffie. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Okay, this is what I alluded to at the top of this. It literally just happened like 15 minutes ago. You cover the NFC South. Brian Burns finally traded away from Carolina. A move that feels like it's been 5 years in the making. He goes to the New York Giants and immediately gets the major payday he was waiting for. It was 87.5 million guaranteed?
87.5 million guaranteed, 5 years, 150, just short of Bosa in terms of, I think he's the second highest paid edge rusher, pass rusher in the NFL. Just huge money, and clearly something Carolina wasn't willing to go to. I think they probably would have liked to have realized that a year ago when the Rams were offering multiple first round picks. But where they are right now, you tag and trade, you get a 2 and a 5, and you move on.
Can you shed any light for me as to why? I mean, I think time is the enemy of any NFL front office. Like, sign the deal or make the trade, one or the other. Like, because even if you're wrong on the deal, the faster you get it signed, the faster you can get out from under it. And the longer you wait on a trade, the less it's going to be for. Clearly, as we're seeing with this deal. I mean, why the holdup on Carolina's part?
Well, I mean, I think initially the thought is that they traded away Christian McCaffrey. They traded away, again, Robbie Anderson. How can you go without him anymore? Traded away Anderson, traded away DJ Moore at the draft last year. And I think the sense was you don't want to trade away all of your stars. So the one guy that they decided was untouchable in this was Brian Burns. And you get him on a 5th-year option and he wants more money. And you get him on a franchise tag and he wants more money. And eventually I think you get to a point where it doesn't help their case that they went from a 7-win team to a 2-win team. So now you're having to overpay your own guys to keep them. And I think you reach the point where, again, before, when it's the GM that made all those decisions, you might be more likely to pay. Now it's Dan Morgan there. Now it's Dave Canales there. It's a fresh start. You can kind of say that was another GM's mistake, not taking those draft picks when we could have got them. When I came on, I realized we couldn't keep him on a long-term deal. I got the best we could get for him. We got the number 39 overall pick. Now they have 33 and 39. That's 2 impact starters. They get a 5th rounder. That'll be somebody. But I think it gives them also, the other nice thing is that now Carolina has $24 million in cap space that they didn't have this morning because they'd franchise tagged Brian Burns. So it's come, luckily, on the first day of free agency, there's still money that can be spent properly. They went out and spent $20 million a year on Robert Hunt to get one of the better guards available to improve their interior offensive line. I wouldn't be surprised if they're not done. I mean, I think if they come out of this week without getting one of these premier receivers, Calvin Ridley or Marquise Brown or one of these types, in theory, they could take one of those picks and trade it for T. Higgins, okay, and do a tag and trade after a tag and trade. They need to upgrade the offense. To me, I thought it was weird for them to put a whole lot of money into the defense while neglecting everything around Bryce Young. And now they have $24 million and a draft pick that will go towards building a better line and better weapons around him so he can look closer to the quarterback they drafted.
I think that is the saving grace. And we were wondering about that before we started recording, is which pick are the Panthers getting? And the fact that they get pick number 39 overall, so the 6th pick in the 2nd round of the NFL draft. I mean, top 40 picks are typically seen as it's a different level of value, right? So yeah, as soon as you said 39, alarm bells went off in my head of like, ooh, could this get you T. Higgins? Because that all of a sudden changes the math a little bit about how you feel about Carolina's offense. Or even if not, having pick 33 and pick 39, maybe it doesn't completely erase the sting of not having a 1st-round pick in this year's draft, but it is a nice consolation prize, though, to know that on Friday night you're going to have a lot of ammunition to work with.
Oh, yeah. And if you wanted to package those 2 picks together, 33 and 39 probably gets you to around 20 or so. If there's one guy that falls that you see as just a difference maker, if one of these elite receivers for some reason falls, if there's an edge, because they now need one with Brian Burns gone, they can now move up. That helps. Again, I mean, they, like we mentioned, they lost Frankie Luvu. So now, you've lost essentially your 2 best defensive players when defense was the strength of this team. So this is a full-on rebuild, but now they have more money to rebuild with. Now they have a high draft pick to help with the rebuild. It helps them rebrand this team as players that Canales and Morgan brought in for this team. as they move forward with a new identity.
Not only that, but especially, Dave Canales, he got this job because of the work that he did with Baker Mayfield. I'll gladly sacrifice my defense in the short term if it means that I can build a sustainable offense around Bryce Young. I mean, that's going to dictate everything about how this hire goes. I really and truly did not expect to spend this much time on the Carolina Panthers on the first day of free agency, but hey, that's the joy of free agency. You never know what's going to happen that's going to bring a team to the forefront. Okay, so I believe that catches us up on the latest, especially with the Austin Ekeler news. So if we don't get to something, that's because it happened after we were recording. We're sorry. We'll get to it next time. But Greg, I want to wrap this up with you. We're going to play a quick game. We asked you ahead of time. We got a handful of categories from the first day of free agency, and I just want to trade notes with you about how this first day went. So let's just start it off. And it can be anything. It could be a big name. It doesn't matter. It could be whoever you want. But so far from what we've seen, what's your favorite signing? What's your favorite move in free agency this year?
I think I like Saquon Barkley to the Eagles, honestly. It's
Okay.
a lot of money by modern running back money. But to think that what he did in New York with a less than ideal offense and offensive line, I think he could be really productive in that offense. I think he could be one of the few backs to justify a $12 million a year salary. And I like it. I thought they did well there. They let some guys go. They picked some guys up. They kind of had a busy day today. But I like the idea of what Barkley can be in that offense.
So here's my thing with Saquon. He goes to the Eagles on a 3-year, $38 million. There's some incentives baked in there as well. He's a wonderful player. He's got 1,600 all-purpose yard potential. Does Saquon, and maybe I'm wrong, but does Saquon raise the Eagles' ceiling? I mean, they just had a 1,200-yard season from DeAndre Swift. They got Miles Sanders, a major deal in free agency the year before that. It just doesn't feel like production from that position was their problem, in my opinion. Like when you consider the money that they could have spent on the back end of their defense or the fact that Jason Kelce is retiring, I just wonder if they could have spent that money. Xavier McKinney going to the Green Bay Packers on a huge deal stands out to me of like, I think maybe that raises the Eagles' ceiling a little bit higher than Saquon. But I don't want to sound like a hater either, because I do think this is going to be incredibly fun to watch.
Right. And fixing the defense probably was a bigger priority for the Eagles than upgrading their offense. I mean, the second half of the season, the reason they were who they were was their defense was awful. So I think they're hoping that a new coordinator there helps. A couple of new pieces shuffled in and out. They're not done there in Philadelphia. No more Fletcher Cox, which is strange. But to bring in somebody already, I think they're going to be active, especially on the back end. So we're not done with it. But like I said, I just liked it as a rare use of resources at running back in this league, higher than whatever the kind of $8 million threshold everybody else seems to be at right now. Josh Jacobs got a lot of money from Green Bay today. That's also a power move, if you will.
Those are both going to be incredibly fun to watch, both of those running backs. My favorite is this is boring, but I think it's going to pay dividends. The LA Rams quietly signed Jonah Jackson for 3 years, $50 million. And remember, last week, they re-signed their own guy, Kevin Dodson. So really fortifying the interior of that line, which I think is always a great move when you have a veteran quarterback like Matthew Stafford, Kyron Williams breaking out in a big way at running back for them. So these aren't moves that are going to sell a lot of jerseys, but man, I feel good about a Rams offense that was already very good last year.
Sure.
All right, let's keep it pushing. This one has potential to be boring. I know my answer is boring, but that's fine. The most impactful signing for you so far?
I think I have to go with Cousins. I think it's just it's the most franchise changing move. It's
I don't think you have a choice but to say Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. And if I wanted to be like non-quarterback division, I think I might say Christian Wilkins going to the Raiders, just because it's so rare to let a talented D tackle like that loose on the open market. And I think having him inside is going to make Max Crosby like a 24 sack guy. Legit major big season ahead for Max Crosby, because they have a lot more they have to deal with on the interior of that Vegas front. So I like that too. If I had to get out of the quarterback box, that's where I'd go next is Christian Wilkins getting paid by the Raiders in Las Vegas.
I think that's another thing worth mentioning. And I'm right there with you, obviously. Max Crosby almost won Defensive Player of the Year anyway. This is only going to help. Tyree Wilson, the top 10 draft pick from last year, another guy that could benefit in a big way from just having a space eating, matchup eating monster like Christian Wilkins in the middle there. But yeah, I mean, Kirk, you do have to just, you got to throw it out there that Kirk Cousins, I said this earlier today, whether you think he's great or not, the Falcons are in the conversation now. They are a relevant team, a team that should expect to make the playoffs. And that just hasn't been the case since about, I don't know, 2018 or so. And I'm guessing Arthur Blank, the owner, is well aware of that. And that's why he was willing to spend this money, is like, hey, I remember how it feels to make the playoffs every year, and I'm sick of not doing it.
Yeah, 6 years without it. That's a drought. And it's one of those where, again, they've set themselves up where I think now if they're not a playoff team, it's a disappointment in Atlanta, which says something. It's been that long since you've been.
Absolutely. Again, talking about fun offenses. I mean, you think of all the top 10 picks they've spent at the skill positions here over the last 3 years. I'm sure fantasy football players are going to be very invested in what's going on with the Falcons. All right. What about an under the radar signing? Like, it can't be Saquon. It can't be Josh Jacobs, but somebody that's under the radar that really piqued your interest here.
I'm going to go Andrew Van Ginkel. I'm going to go Minnesota Vikings. Brian Flores, getting one of his old Miami guys and bringing him up.
That qualifies.
It's 2 years, $20 million. It's fairly inexpensive. But I think it's a good pick for them. They brought in a couple different defensive guys. I mean, obviously they lose Cousins today. That's going to be the headline in Minnesota is who the heck is their quarterback moving forward. But their defense got better. And if they can find an answer at quarterback, somewhere between Cousins and Sam Darnold, I think their defense will be better for it.
I'm a big fan. This one happened relatively recently before we recorded, but the Cincinnati Bengals brought in Geno Stone on a 2-year, $15 million deal. Safety play was so big for defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo there in Cincinnati. When you think about Jesse Bates earned a huge payday with Atlanta last year, Von Bell in Carolina. Lou Anarumo, turns out, knows how to use a versatile safety, and Geno Stone had an amazing year, not even as the primary guy. He got a lot of playing time due to injuries, but 9 pass breakups and, of course, 7 interceptions for Baltimore last year. If a defensive mind like Lou Anarumo wants you, I'm going to assume it's probably a pretty good move, and I'm guessing Geno Stone, and that is not a big contract. Like, Geno Stone has the potential to very much outplay that deal.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And when you look at, I mean, that defense, if you're going to borrow from a defense, if you're going to steal from a defense, that's the defense you want to do it from.
Right.
And like you said, I think they took a step back to lose Bell, to lose Jesse Bates. I think it was inevitable they'd take a step back, and their losses, their drop off defensively kind of got obscured because they'd lost Burrow and they weren't nearly the team overall. But if you think about defensive minds, like I said, Lou's near the top of the list, and this gives him a big weapon and a center fielder who, again, is probably good for 5 or 6 picks in that defense.
Okay. It's all been very positive, very friendly to this point. We're not going to say, like, I think it's so dumb to call somebody like a loser on day one of free agency. Like I said, 75% of these deals are probably not going to age very well. Like, you can go back and look and see, of all of this money that gets spent, a lot of it is going to be regrettable. But with that said, I think it's interesting to look at the process, like look at why teams do things and who they target. And we can't say that they are a loser, but some of these moves are confusing. So I'm curious if you have a head scratching or a confusing decision that went down here today.
Yeah, I'll give you 2. The first one was literally the first contract signed today, and that's DeAndre Swift going to the Bears, getting 3 and 18. I felt like there was a little bit of a warning last year, and the Eagles had a Pro Bowl running back in Miles Sanders, had like 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns in Philly. He goes to Carolina, gets paid well, like $6 million a year, and did nothing in Carolina. Granted, a terrible offensive situation, but he went from like 4.9 a carry to like 3.3 a carry. And you wonder, like, oh, how much of that was just getting to run behind an amazing offensive line in a loaded offense in Philly? And now, again, DeAndre Swift comes to Philly, does well, gets 1,000 yards, makes the Pro Bowl, boom, gets paid. And I just wonder, I worried that Chicago, who didn't want to pay David Montgomery money a year ago and let him walk, and he goes and has 13 touchdowns and 1,000 yards in Detroit, why they're now looking to pay somebody who did really well in another offense, but I don't know if he's going to have that same success in Chicago. Now that I'm done dumping on him, I will also give a shout out to John Runyon. There was kind of this crazy guard jackpot money being distributed today. Robert Hunt got paid. A lot of guys got paid in ways. Landon Dickerson got 21 million a year. Guard is like right there with tackle now in the crazy offensive money going out. But Runyon got 3 and 30, and I just don't know if I thought of him as a above average guard. I think he was number 47 among guards, Pro Football Focus this year. Not that PFF is the end all, but that's bottom quarter of starting guards. So to go out and think that he's the answer and give him 10 million a year, it felt like a non-answer or a half measure to me there.
I'm baffled by almost everything that the Jacksonville Jaguars have done today. And the crazy, like, look, I get it. You're going to lose players. If you don't hit on your draft picks, you've got to replace them in free agency. The market is always going to be more expensive. So I get it. You got to spend money to replenish a team. That's what we were talking about with Washington. But my thing is, we just watched Jacksonville have a similar day to this 2 years ago. And for the most part, those deals haven't really worked out that well. You know, Christian Kirk has had his moments, but I don't think has lived up to the deal that he signed a couple years ago. Florenzo Fatukasi, the defensive tackle, they released him last week. And then they go out today and they signed Gabe Davis to a 3-year, $39 million deal. Darnell Savage, who I think most Packers fans would tell you they're hoping to find an upgrade to Darnell Savage. He gets a nice deal. Mitch Morse, who was recently released, granted, I mean, that's a cost-saving measure by the Buffalo Bills, but it's just weird to see the Jags go back to the same strategy that got them to a disappointing finish this year. Like, you know, they're in the mix for the 1 seed and they fall apart down the stretch and they're back here doing things the exact same way. I think the whole thing is very confusing is the perfect word for it. Like, you were all here 2 years ago. Why are we doing this again?
So sometimes there's that lag where you get the news that a team has signed somebody, but you don't get the money right away, right? And you kind of get excited, like, oh, wow, that's a big name. But you don't know the context of, like, how much was that dress? Or, like, that was a nice dinner. How much did that dinner cost? And so I literally built it up in my head as being a far worse contract for Gabe Davis than I was worried they're giving Gabe like 3 and 50.
Sure.
Big, like 6, like, again, I probably was more critical of Christian Kirk's deal when he got it, and he's probably been closer to earning that value than I expected him to. But Gabe Davis, when it came in at 13 mil a year, I was like, oh, you know what? That's actually not bad. That's almost wise spending on the first day of free agency, and you don't see that. So within that weird expectation I built up in my head, I was like, you go, Jaguars.
Okay, but you're not wrong, but here's the confusing thing. And granted, it's 1 day. We'll see what they do. But look, I don't mean to crap on Gabe Davis. I think he fits a very specific and useful role. He had some big moments in Buffalo, but I think Gabe Davis needs a number 1 receiver. And we know that's not Christian Kirk, despite what the money says. And we don't know what's going to happen with Calvin Ridley, who is currently still sitting out there. I mean, if the Jags bring back Calvin Ridley, I would look at it and say, wow, you are spending a hell of a lot of money on your top 3 receivers, first of all. But so if they do that, then fine. I would say you have a very expensive receiver core, but it looks pretty good. But what if they don't? I mean, I don't think you move Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk up a layer in terms of their involvement in the offense. Like I said, it just seems like a backward way to do things, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was presuming that they were moving on from Ridley. I didn't expect them to add a $20 million and a $13 million receiver in the same year. So if they did, I mean, Gabe is not a get people excited about losing Calvin Ridley replacement type move. And Jacksonville's got to be careful. And then Jacksonville had that window where it looked like the division was theirs, and now Houston is right there. Tennessee has a new coach. Indy's going to have with Luck, a healthy Anthony Richardson leading them after what was a surprisingly resilient team last year. And if they're not careful, the Jags can really fall behind in a bad division.
Yeah, and which is a crazy thing to say about a team that I saw as a potential number 1 seed in the playoffs last year, was fighting for it with 6 weeks to play. It's crazy how quickly life can change in the NFL. All right. One last one before we let you go. And it is only one day, so we'll have to revisit this as free agency winds down. But with most of these major deals going through, and I am hearing, I feel like a breaking news reporter. We do have the Miami Dolphins. Yeah, right. Miami Dolphins agreeing to a deal with former Seahawks first round pick Jordan Brooks on a 3-year, $30 million deal. I like that a lot. I don't think it's enough to make me call the Dolphins the day one winners. But Greg,
they lost a lot today.
Yeah, which I meant to say that earlier. I get it. Look, I hate to side with billionaires over millionaires. I'm always going to side, like, the NFL teams should push to win. You should demand that of your owner to try to spend as much money to be as competitive as possible. But the Dolphins are a very real reminder of what it can look like when you do that. And I think that's why Christian Wilkins isn't there anymore. I think that's why they've had to make a lot of the decisions they've made over the last couple of days. I digress. Aside from what's going on in Miami, Greg, who do you think won the first 24 hours, really more like the first 12 hours of free agency?
Yeah, Washington definitely spent a lot. And that impressed me just to see the sheer volume of what they added there. Vegas, I didn't have high expectations for Vegas going in here. They did let Josh Jacobs go with Hurts. Minshew feels like a nice signing, I'll be honest. For what they paid, there's so much money that gets paid in free agency. So to be able to get the 20th, 22nd best quarterback in the NFL, if things go right, for 2 years and $25 million, feels like it's okay. Again, Wilkins, I think, is a game changer on the defense. To have Antonio Pierce get to add, what for him is probably the second best player in his defense, that seems like a strong thing for them. There's not a single thing. We talked about the Dolphins. They would have been an easier pick as the team that lost the most today. Jordan Brooks notwithstanding. That's probably easier to pick than a big winner because there wasn't one person that went crazy. The Patriots had so much money. They were very quiet today. The Titans had some kind of moves early on. I thought they'd be more active. So Washington is the big spenders right now, but I don't see a clear cut, wow, this team is 4 wins better than they were this morning kind of thing.
Well, I think there's one obvious one. We've already given it enough oxygen. I mean, it's Atlanta, I think. Again, just the Falcons are relevant in a way now that they just haven't been. I mean, again, they're leading podcasts like this. They're leading national TV. Like I said, I don't know if Kirk Cousins gets them over that hump and to a championship, but I think he will have them in the mix in a way that just hasn't been the case. The other one, and I think this is the way that I would prefer my team handle free agency, is I'm going to guess the Green Bay Packers don't do a whole lot else.
Yeah.
But they made an impact signing on each side of the ball. They go and get, in my opinion, the best running back in football, Josh Jacobs. Maybe not, well, excuse me, Christian McCaffrey. I'm so sorry. Okay, maybe not the best, but certainly
the best available.
Certainly the best available, and certainly on the short list. I mean, when you talk so often, Saquon Barkley is a great example. I mean, he's a great player, but there is an element of buyer beware where you're like, well, the injuries have been an issue. He's spent a lot of time touching the ball behind a terrible offensive line. Josh Jacobs, for the most part, I mean, the guy's 26. The injury issues have been minimal. He's shown that he can be an NFL rushing champ in a decent offense, and now he's going to a very good offense. And then on the flip side, you got a new defensive coordinator in Jeff Hafley. You bring in a versatile safety like Xavier McKinney who can sort of help him revamp that, and it's a unit that already has a lot of talent on it. If the Packers don't do anything else, I think they feel very, very good about where they are heading into the draft. So I feel really good about the work that they were able to do today.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's one of those where, I mean, McKinney probably of the state, there were so many safeties out there all of a sudden, but in terms of one that wasn't cut loose and could have been franchised, I think they did really well there. And Jacobs, again, makes Jordan Love's life so much easier. He's had a good 1-2 punch over the years, but to have a 25 carry a game horse that you can ride in that offense and take some of the pressure off him with all those young receivers back. Green Bay should be a fun offense to watch.
It's ironic we would be saying that too about the Packers on a day
Right.
when, they're expected to part ways with two franchise legends. Obviously, Aaron Jones gets the short end of the stick, and it sounds like he'll be released after they sign Josh Jacobs, and David Bakhtiari also moving on. But I mean, unfortunately, Bakhtiari hasn't been much of a factor for 2-3 years at this point. And Aaron Jones, I get it. It's going to be emotional parting ways with a guy that's done so much for your team, but replacing him with Josh Jacobs is not a terrible consolation prize. So I already felt really good about the Packers. I feel even better about where they are now.
Agreed. And again, it's there's these running backs. It's a good position to stay young at. So to move on and get 4 years younger, going from Jones to Jacobs, you kind of saw that in Tennessee a little bit as well, where they knew that they're moving on from Henry. Tony Pollard is not the force that Derrick Henry is, but on balance, it's a nice position to recycle and get younger and just switch out for a newer model, if you will.
And with that, we can wrap this up and hope that nothing too crazy happens between now and the next time we record. Greg, is there anything else? Anything I'm forgetting? Anything that you're red hot about before we get out of here?
No. I think we hit it well. We still know where Justin Fields goes. That's kind of my unanswered question, is where he's going to land. There had been a split second where it sounded like Vegas might get involved there, and that would have been intriguing. I don't know if Minshew kills that or not, but there's the chance that Fields doesn't go somewhere where he's an obvious starter or a presumptive starter. And that, I think we've expected he would, but there's only so many quarterbacks to go around. So my big question right now is, where does he end up? How do they get something for him? And how does he come out of this with at least a shot at a starting job somewhere?
Yeah, I think Vegas is going to be the front runner until otherwise notified. And on top of that, I also think I'm starting to think wherever Justin Fields goes, it's not going to be a given that he's the starter when the season starts. I think you're either talking about maybe potentially backing up or at the very least competing for a starting job once training camp starts, which I'm not sure how many people had that on their bingo cards.
Right. And the problem with Fields is that you have to decide by May whether you're picking up his option of $22 million for next year. And if you don't know he's your starter, you probably don't want to do that. So now you're talking about a team that might only be looking at him as a 1-year rental, which means a smaller return for Chicago. You could kind of do that thing like they did with Jordan Love, where they didn't quite pick up the option, but they gave him some money in year 2. It complicates the trade calculus on Justin Fields if he doesn't go to a team that expects him to start right away.
It's funny. All through the offseason, it's kind of been decreasing. Like, it started out, he was playing really well at the end of the year, and it's like, maybe they can get a 1 for Fields. And then it's like, 2 or a 3 is probably more realistic. And as I'm sitting here in mid-March, I'm like, maybe a 4 gets it done. And if he's going to go, be in a quarterback competition. So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Greg, it's always so much fun having you on, man. I appreciate it. And given the way that this goes, we'll probably be talking to you soon when some more stuff pops off, man. Thanks a lot.
Of course. Thanks for having me on, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Greg for stopping by and helping me get through it all. The crazy thing is, we talked for 45 minutes and didn't hit on everything that happened. That's what happens when the entire league is out here trying to get better in the same 12-hour window. So before we get out of here, it's been a minute since we've done the hurry up offense. We usually do this for game previews to get through all the games on a given weekend. We're going to do it for free agency. We're going to take you through the best of the rest, everything else that happened that Greg and I didn't have a chance to get to. My wonderful producers are going to give me 3.5 minutes to make sure I don't go on too long. And I'm going to try to there's no way I'm going to hit everything. There have been like 500 transactions in the NFL already on the first day of free agency, but we're going to get to the big stuff that happened. We're going to try to do it as quickly and efficiently as possible to get you on your way. So let's start it back in Philadelphia. We talked about Saquon Barkley, but on the other side of the ball, the Eagles also bringing in one of the biggest defensive free agents of the year, former Jets edge rusher Bryce Huff, agreeing to a 3-year, $51 million deal to sign on to Philadelphia's pass rush. He becomes the highest paid non-quarterback undrafted free agent in NFL history. What a freaking success story for Bryce Huff. I'm curious what this means. We've already heard the trade rumors around Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat. Hassan Reddick about to cost the Eagles $22 million against the cap. Josh Sweat, something like $9 million. It's probably possible the Eagles keep all 3 on the team and their pass rush would be great for it. But I'm going to guess one of those guys gets moved between now and the draft, but it won't be Bryce Huff, the newest member of the Eagles pass rush. Sticking with pass rushers, Leonard Floyd had a wonderful year in Buffalo. The guy's had 9 or more sacks in 4 straight years. He jumps back to the NFC West. Remember, he used to play for the LA Rams. He is the newest San Francisco 49er. 2 years, $20 million. I'm guessing he's going to be the newest replacement for Chase Young opposite Nick Bosa. I wonder if San Francisco has more work to do, though, with Eric Armstead also being released. We'll see. I mentioned Buffalo. Deion Dawkins tried to troll us all and act like he was getting released, but in fact, he re-signs with the Buffalo Bills. 3 years, $50 million for the left tackle. Good for him. In Indianapolis, a trio of re-signings for the Colts, the first of which, Michael Pittman Jr., the latest guy who goes from the franchise tag to a new contract. He gets 3 years, roughly $71 million. Defensive end Tyquan Lewis and defensive tackle Grover Stewart re-signing as well. So the Colts doing a good job of keeping their own. Yes, Jawan Jennings is a wide receiver 4, or wide receiver 3, but it's also worth mentioning that he re-signs in San Francisco. Guy was almost the Super Bowl MVP. He re-ups with the 49ers to keep that offense intact. Here's a sneaky good signing that I love. The LA Chargers let Austin Ekeler walk out the door, but they do agree with running back Gus Edwards on a 2-year, $6.5 million deal. If you know anything about Jim Harbaugh, he wants a battering ram, one-cut running back. That's Gus Edwards to a T. Very unsurprising. Big signing in the NFC North. Jonathan Grenard, former of the Houston Texans, signs with the Minnesota Vikings on a 4-year, $76 million deal. Big signing for a guy who has definitely earned it. I'm just curious what it means for Danielle Hunter. As of this recording, Danielle Hunter has not signed, but with Grenard going to Minnesota, I doubt he is a Viking for much longer. Center Lloyd Cushenberry, arguably the best center on the market this year. He signs in Tennessee. 4 years, $50 million for the former Denver Bronco. Obvious that Rand Carthon, the GM in Tennessee, trying to fix that offensive line. They drafted Peter Skoronski last year. Now they've got Lloyd Cushenberry in the middle. Oh, and Tony Pollard to run behind him. Not too bad. 2 big re-signings in Cleveland. Zadarius Smith, the defensive end, defensive tackle Maurice Hurst re-signing to work with Myles Garrett. Yeah, I wouldn't want to play anywhere but with the defensive player of the year either. That's not surprising. Devin Singletary agrees to a nice little payday, 3 years, $16.5 million to sign with the New York Giants. Defensive lineman Danico Autry gets 2 years, $20 million. Okay, I didn't make it. Sorry. There's a lot going on in the first day. Danico Autry gets 2 years, $20 million to sign with the Houston Texans. Former Titans defensive lineman and former Titans linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair, one of the best tacklers in the league over the last couple of years. 3 years, $34 million. I love it when signings just make sense. D'Amico Ryans knows he needs to build up his defense. He had to play against Danico Autry and Azeez Al-Shaair twice a year with Tennessee last year. Oh, by the way, Al-Shaair played for D'Amico a couple years ago. So yeah, you love it when a coach gets to free agency and he's like, yeah, bring me my guys. That's exactly what's happening in Houston with those 2 signings. One last one, literally as we're wrapping up recording, offensive lineman Michael Onwenu re-signs with the New England Patriots. 3 years, $57 million. Greg mentioned the Pats have a ton of cap space, hadn't done a whole lot with it. Mike Onwenu eats up a significant chunk of that to help them rebuild their offensive line. I'm exhausted. That is a whole lot of free agency news, and there's plenty more coming because, look, we got the list. There's no shortage of big-name, interesting players still left out there. As of this recording, Jags receiver Calvin Ridley still available. I mentioned Vikings defensive end Danielle Hunter, Cowboys offensive tackle Tyron Smith, of course, King Henry, Derrick Henry still sitting out there, as well as a dozen other big-name difference-maker players. We will be back later this week to catch you up on everything that happens there. Potentially more trades coming. Who the hell knows? It's the start of the league year. Anything's possible. This was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot to Greg. I'll catch y'all next time. Yeah, please go follow us on all on the socials, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. You know the drill. We're on all the social networks at NFL on Fox Pod. We will be back Thursday to catch you up on everything. And yeah, go find us on social for everything in between. I appreciate it so much. I'm going to go try to sneak a nap in while I can. I'll talk to y'all soon.